So we are going to be taking a look at session state, and we're going to learn how to turn it on in our MVC app, how to save session data in the controller, and how to access that session data in the view. We will also learn how to handle more complex data like objects, and how to save those as session data and how to access those as well. The example that is in the book, you guys can download. And I've also got another example that kind of walks through how to use the iSession interface. And we will be taking a look at that later on in this lecture demo, and we'll specifically be looking at this example. So as far as session state goes, the state refers to the current status of the properties, the variables, and the other data that are maintained by your web app. And we're looking at that status for a single user during a single web session. Okay. Web applications by default use the HTTP protocol, and that is a stateless protocol. So it's not tracking everything that you do when you are at a website. So if you add data and change data and delete data, by default, it doesn't track all of that. Each HTTP request is treated as an independent request, and the server doesn't store information about the previous request. And there are going to be times when you would like to store that session data. And so session meaning your internet session. And there are several different techniques to do this in ASP.NET Core. Okay, and so we've listed some of these techniques, and I think you guys have seen us use some of them already. You could do a hidden field. You could do a query string. You could use a cookie, and that is actually the procedure that MVC ASP.NET Core uses. And you may be thinking, well, wait a minute, what if they've disabled cookies? It can get past that. So we don't need to worry about that. We can store data in the route, which shows up in the URL, or we can, use view bags, temp data, that kind of thing. So basically, session state is a feature in ASP.NET Core that lets us temporarily save and store the user's data. And that allows that data to persist across requests. And normally, that data is not available across requests. So how this works in ASP.NET Core and our MVC app is that when the user starts a web session, a session cookie is automatically created that stores the user's session ID. And the browser passes the cookie to the server with each HTTP request. The session state uses the ID in the cookie to identify the user's session and data. And that data is going to exist until the web session ends or the app removes it. And so graphically, this is kind of a graphic of that process and how it works. For those of you that like to see it in graphic form. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with a cookie is a key value pair, and it's created on the server, passed to the browser, in the HTTP response. Okay, and for our MVC app, the cookie is storing the user's session ID. So how do we use session state in our ASP.NET Core MVC app? Well, by default, it is not turned on. And so what we have to do is configure the middleware pipeline to include all of the services we need. And then we can actually include session state. So first we add the services. And there is a very specific location in the program.cs file where you have to add these services. These services have to be added above where you are adding the controllers with the views. Okay, and so you can see I've highlighted them, but we're going to add the memory cache and we're going to add session. And these are services for both. And obviously the session data is using the memory cache because it's the current web session. Okay, so we add services for both of those. There are some options that we can add for these session data that we will look at in a minute, because when you add those services, there are defaults. And so if you don't like the defaults, then you can use the session options to change them. So the first step is to add the services. And then the second step is to tell it to use the session. Okay, so app use session tells it to actually use the session data. Now, what are the defaults and why might I need to change them? So the default for our cookie is false. And because some people have turned off cookies, we need to set that to true. The cookie is essential. That is true. Because that's going to allow your app to save the cookie, even if the cookie feature is turned off. And the other setting that you may want to adjust is the timeout. The default is 20 minutes. You may want to shorten that up to like 5. And so this is how you would do that. Number of seconds times 5 is going to give us 5 minutes. Okay, 60 seconds in a minute, multiplying that by 5. Okay. If you have client-side scripts that need to access the session cookie, so let's say you've got JavaScript and for some reason you need to access that cookie, then you're going to also want to include this option. Okay, otherwise you don't need that option.